Hello, Michelle and Michelle.
Hi.
Hello.
How do you two Michelle know each other?
Well, I was teaching a storytelling class at Stanford, and Michelle took the class while she was an undergrad, and then she became my TA. She became the TA for the class. After that, we just like stories were really prevalent. I'm gonna sort of hand the story over to Michelle now. So after that,
Yeah, we stayed in touch and we kind of reconnected at a certain point when I was wanting to incorporate more of the stuff that we had done in the class into potentially my career that I was trying to figure out. And Michelle was also looking to kind of bring back the class in another iteration. So we ended up teaching the a version of the class, but kind of for the general public and like developing that together and teaching it together. A lot of that through COVID. So there's a lot of online teaching, which was interesting, but ultimately pretty successful and good. And yeah, Michelle is still teaching this a version of this class today. And I feel like I'm curious to hear more from Michelle. Just moved. We used to live really nearby each other, but she just moved across the country. So now I'm like, what's going on, Michelle? What are you learning about stories over there in Massachusetts? But yeah, it's fun to get to be on this call together.
yeah, so it's really, really fun. So yeah, I'm actually sort of still bi-coastal, but right now I'm out here and here is Massachusetts. So that's kind of our origin story of how we started working together with stories. Uh, Michelle just was on fire about stories and so were we. So it was a good fit.
And so are we at Awaken. We tell so many stories and we have our storytelling circles and I would love to have a storytelling class at Awaken one day. So I'm so curious. Um, And there's so much power in storytelling. So I want to learn from you two today how to tell a true story in front of an audience in 5 minutes. I hear that's what you do. Michelle's been telling me about it. So like, how does this happen?
Um, which Michelle, like
You
All
started off,
the, all
Michelle.
the
Go.
Michelle, you
all the
guys are just,
I've been talking. I feel it. Well, I remember. Well, maybe I'll start because I did talk to Christy about it initially, but probably I guess 2 years ago when we were in France together, and you had just done, or my dad had just participated in the 2 week like coach training, and so we were talking about coaching, and I was really curious to learn about coaching because it really reminded me of a lot of this storycraft work, specifically or specifically the work of the coach as it compares to the work of the story coach. Um, and I'm sure there are parallels between the telling of the stories as well. But I felt like in my work in helping people find and tell their stories, I was thinking of that as you were describing the work of coaching someone. Mostly there was this core principle I feel like of listening and knowing that they have what they need inside of them and not putting too much pressure. Sometimes I remember earlier when I was coaching stories, I would think, "Ooh, it's my job to like solve it and like find a really cool like answer that helps them tell like understand what their story is about and helps fill in a gap for them and then they'll be so thrilled with me and I'll feel so good." And I mean sometimes that happens. So I think when that happens I'm like, nice, like let me do that again. That's my job. But I think as I've done it more, one, I've realized if I think that that's my job, I'm less likely to be able to actually do it well because that kind of puts me in that mindset. I feel like this is also very much an improv principle of like, do if you're thinking too hard ahead, you're actually not going to be present in the moment and to do a good job. But it's actually by releasing that pressure that you're able to like be brilliant and trusting that you can do that from, just listening and being curious and not preparing. Anyway, so that
yeah,
was my initial seed of feeling like there was some like connection here between these two worlds. But Michelle, maybe you
I
can
see a
describe a little
huge
bit.
connection because
Yeah.
the whole coaching posture is that I don't know, you're the one who knows. I don't connect the dots, you connect the dots, but there's something about hearing yourself tell your own stories, that does something really deeply inside, especially if there's plenty of metaphor and imagery and feeling in it. So I'd love to hear, Michelle, Darby, what you want to add to this.
Um, all the stuff that Michelle says, awesome. I totally, bing, 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 for sure. What we do when we're teaching people to tell a story, give tools, basically, like, what is the story? How do you put it together? Um, as I've been thinking about this over the years, though, over the years of teaching people to tell their stories, it occurs to me that there are really no stories. There's just stuff that happens to us. We make meaning of those events, and we have a through line that we make those meanings from. So dependent on what filter we're looking at it through, it can either be a tragedy or a hero's story. So I think in some ways, when I'm working with someone on the story, it's their story. So however they want to view it, they can. There's always a choice, though, when you're telling your own story of how you want to have that story nourish you or not. So a story where you are meeting each challenge, because let's face it, if you are still alive, you have met each challenge. You are, and we are all not going to be alive one day. So why not view it as things that can strengthen you so that you can continue to build and grow and progress in your life? But in terms of that, the other thing we do is we give lots of opportunities for people to practice telling their stories with coaching. We work with certain techniques that help the storyteller get more closer to the core of what they're trying to say. Certain things can interfere with that process, and we work with that as well. They're just technical things that, interestingly, the technical things lead to the deeper sort of connection. I find that fascinating every time it happens. And then we teach people how to tell their story in front of other people, because part of the process is understanding your own story, is figuring out what filter is going to give you the most nourishment as a storyteller. But the other part is how to tell it to other people so it's actually nourishment for them as well, right? So that what you're doing is this story isn't, it's about you and it's not, right? It's its own self. And to tell that story properly, there's a certain amount of work and preparation and understanding and technical stuff and all the stuff that goes into it. And at the end, it's so that the listener can understand and maybe walk in your shoes for a little while. I think that creates a level of empathy and understanding between humans that we actually really crave.
I totally agree. Um, yeah. So how far do you think we can get in a short podcast? Like, if I were to be your guinea pig and you were to teach me how to tell my story, this is a little vulnerable. Like, would that be something we can do now?
Yeah, I feel
Sure.
like that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
I'm, I wonder, I guess just to sidebar briefly with Michelle to strategize how we'll do this. I think I think it could be nice to think about the three main phases of the class being the and we can explain this more, but mining, crafting, and performance.
Yep.
And then maybe do like one exercise that represents each of those. With whatever example Christy wants to do. I think, yeah. I also think we should talk about fillers, because as you were talking about the technical things, I think that's a really good specific technical thing that, anyway, I'm just bookmarking that. I think that'd be fun to try.
Yeah, Michelle and I are on the same page.
We're on the same page.
The filler have been sort of like this incredible magical thing to explore. And the more I go into it, the more I work with storytellers, the more important it becomes, the more, but hopefully we'll get to that with you so you can feel what it's like to what we're talking about and what happens when fillers are removed from a story.
I don't even know what a filler is, so I'm just going to learn by doing. That's my favorite way to learn. So,
great.
Do it to me, Michelle.
Sounds good. Maybe how do you think would be best to start off, Michelle? We could just hear a little bit about what Christy wants to explore, or if you have a prompt, we could go from
I
there.
have an idea of something she can do. It'll take us about 3 minutes to do the 3 different versions of it. But
Yeah.
unless Christy, unless you have a story at the top of your mind that you wanted to approach.
To hear your prompt.
Oh,
I would get thousands of stories, but I want to hear from you.
okay. I'm trying to get a timer
Oh,
because
I
I
got it.
wanted.
I
Okay,
got
you
it.
got it. Minute, 1 minute.
Yep.
What you're gonna do? You're gonna tell the story of your life in 1 minute. Okay. Tell the story of your life in 1 minute. Michelle's going to say go, and then she's going to tell you like when 10 seconds are left and then stop.
Okay.
It's gonna feel really short,
It
but
will.
but see what comes out, and there's no wrong way to do it.
That's right.
All right.
Okay.
Tell me when to start.
Here we go. Go.
All right. My story is nomadic from way before I was born. I had grandparents come to the US from Italy and the other grandparents from Australia. And then on the other side of the polarity, there's sort of we've been here for generations, the English and Irish blood. Well, Irish is pretty recent too. And so 4 generations later, I'm finding myself back in Europe and really wondering who is this person? Like there's so many like deeply almost cultic religious strains in the family and ways things need to be done. And my story is one of difference. So going back a few generations and then being like, am
And
I
that's
an
a minute.
American Christian woman or something? There you
Beautiful.
go. That was
Yeah.
1 minute, huh?
That was
That's
1 minute. Yeah, you did
That was
great.
quick.
Goes
Yeah.
back. How'd that feel?
Well, it was kind of it felt a little like around it felt more contextual, but it also felt very personal and deep too, even though I didn't say a whole lot about myself, I don't think. Anyway.
I love how you approach that. I
Great.
actually think that, well, tell me, Michelle, you've done this exercise a little more than me, but I think that I imagine that often we're gonna have you do it again. And so we're gonna kind of progress through it. Where you started is maybe somewhere where we would hope people would end potentially. I liked how you were, and not that that's like the best way or that you finally got to the right way, but I think you were in this kind of like very zoomed out, like, um, rather than, I was born here and I have a sibling and, I
Yeah.
recently, I lived here, like those sort of details
Yeah.
and the numbers, which I think those are great too. So maybe as we do different iterations, we can like focus our lens in those different ways. What did you
Well,
think, Michelle?
yeah. So here's what I want you to do. You're going to tell it again in 1 minute. You have to try and cover your whole life, and you cannot use anything you said before. Okay.
Okay.
You
Nothing
have,
I said before covers all 53 years.
if you can. So just
Mm.
take you. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, I'll do
Ready?
the timer and I'll kind of wave when there's 10 seconds left. That works. Okay. Whenever you're ready, set, go.
All right. Years 1 to 4 were Baptist Church in New Hampshire. And then years 5 to 16 were like super stable. Lone Italians in this very strange Dutch community, Dutch Reformed community with one church, one school. Everyone did the same thing. And then years 16 to 20 were in Chicago at Wheaton, where I met my husband. Then we had a 10 years in DC. And we had one child per continent. So we had a child in DC, child in Paris, a child in Nairobi, only cities with stars because our children are amazing. And then we've just kind of been like kicked down the road a few times to different countries. Here we are in France.
Awesome. Okay,
Mm.
great. We're not going to talk too much about that this time, but
Okay.
how was that for you?
Very speedy, and it felt like a lot of bouncing around. Like it really brought to my awareness, like feeling like a ping pong ball.
Okay, great. Now, you're going to do it again. You're going to do what you can to cover your life. You might have to dig a little bit in a different way. You have 1 minute. You cannot use any of the same content.
Okay, great. I'll give you like
All
a
right.
couple seconds to think about where you might dig, and then we'll start. Okay, here we go. You feel ready? Here we go. Go.
I am a very expansive person. I have met so many people from so many countries, and each one that I meet brings me something new. And so I have Kenya in me, France in me, I have America in me. Those are kind of my central countries. And I have experiences with Christians, Muslims, Jews, Baha'i, um, friendships with people of all genders, sexual orientations, um, people with dramatically different experiences and beliefs. And each person enriches me and helps me to grow in my ability to connect.
Awesome.
Perfect.
That was okay.
Mm.
We're going to
Really
do,
beautiful.
we're not that yet because I'm doing a surprise one. You're going to do one more. And this time, if you feel like there's some kind of event in there that you kind of toggled around with that you want to spend a minute on, this is the time to do that. Okay. So do
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if I had a little heat that you're like, oh, I wish I could spend whole minute on that one. This is your chance. Okay.
Okay.
So take a breath.
Beautiful. Okay. Ready, set, go.
My story is one of rejection and acceptance. It is being other and being included. And it is a story of questioning and I guess staying questioning, being willing to stay with paradox and uncertainty and just moving toward love. Just loving myself, loving other people, being me, letting other people be them, and really accepting as much as I can, which isn't always easy. I get pretty grouchy sometimes too, and I bear some wounds of rejection and feeling different from others, and that's a good thing.
Great. Okay.
You guys are just going to make
Great
me
job.
keep telling stories till I cry, right?
That
That's,
wasn't
no, that's not necessarily always the point, but great job.
I'm a good crier too.
Oh, that was beautiful. So let's say you were in a class. We do this exercise in the class. But and something rose from that, and you're like, so there were a couple questions I have. Like you would be working with a partner with that, and they would write down a few things. They'd be like, "Ooh, I want to know more about this," or "Ooh, this sounds really interesting." There were a couple things you said in a couple of the versions. So I'd be like, okay, you talked about people who brought something new to you. There would be potentially a story in there of someone specific, what they brought to you, how that changed you. Because one of the ways we look at a story is it's not actually a story unless the protagonist changed. You are the protagonist. You were one way at the beginning, and you're a different way after whatever happened to you. You were impacted by the event. The truth of the matter, change is constant in our world. That is life, is change. So it's not that hard to find a story where we are changed. We just have to be willing to tell it and live in that story for a little while. The other thing I had questions about, I wanted some specific, like after this last version, I was like, ooh, there's some rich stuff in there. I want to hear one of the stories about rejection and acceptance, or othered and included, or questioning and continuing to question and how that shifts and change. There's so much things in there that you could then find a story to start working on to tell. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that covers it pretty well. I think one of the fun parts in the class is with these, when you have a partner, and in this case, I guess we're kind of collectively your partners, it's an important lesson, I guess, that some people come into the class feeling like, oh, I'm just me. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I have stories. I'm kind of just a person. I didn't like save an orphan from underneath a bridge or something. Like, I don't know. I didn't do something crazy. But when we do an exercise like this, where we're kind of just like interviewing you about your life and you're sharing things and we're listening, there's such a power in realizing that, and some people for sort of the first time, that like two other people, like everything you said was like completely fascinating. Like it's like, oh my gosh, she lived in France, she lived in Kenya, like she has 3 kids, like what are they like what's her husband like, what is she, oh, when was she rejected, when was she, like there's so much that's so fascinating in there. And sometimes for you or for me, like I feel like, oh, that's just my life. Like I know that, I'm in that all the time, so it's very familiar. And you can downplay to yourself, I guess, how rich and fascinating it is to be, and at least I guess worthy of being listened to and shared, and that people could get something really amazing from it. So I always love these exercises where partners kind of can mirror back, like, oh, these are things that I want to hear more about, or these are things that I thought were really interesting. Because it's so easy to do, because everyone, especially when you're with it's even more powerful when you're doing it with like a complete stranger. Like I literally know nothing about you, and therefore basically everything you're saying is sounding really, really interesting, and I'm excited to hear more. I'd be curious along the lines of what Michelle said in getting more specific. Maybe we could do a exercise around details. Maybe as I talk, Michelle can think of a good exercise. But I think another part of kind of this first third of the class is about mining. So I feel like what we just did was mining, like uncovering, finding the gems, finding the things that we want to focus on. And that exercise, I feel like we found, okay, some hot spots and some good general themes and some good places to explore. And then I think we can also mine in a way that's sort of at a more granular level, where it's like, okay, maybe we'll have you think of a very specific person or moment or like more granular story. And then it's like, okay, like what color was the chair? Like what was the weather like? Like what were you thinking about? Like those really specific details that I think a good story needs to combine both these thematic elements of like, acceptance and rejection and those things, and like really very, very ultra specific things like the doll that was on the shelf or whatever it might be. I think those things, both for the teller, they place you there. Like that's a moment in your memory that those details will be evocative for you and get you more connected to the feeling that you were feeling then. And therefore then it gives you an ability to transfer that to us so that we can feel like we're in the room too. So maybe we do something about that.
Before I jump into that, Christy, want to acknowledge how beautiful that was that you shared, because I feel I don't know, but because my screen is so little on my phone, but I feel like that's still a little present in the room, that sense of, yeah. So I just want to acknowledge that and let you know that I can feel that on this tiny little screen. And I wanted to just give you kudos for sharing that, for being in that space with yourself. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And I trust Michelle very much, the other Michelle. I've known her since the 90s, since the DC days, since first. She's very much shorter than she is now. And she's told me really great things about you, Michelle, and I love storytelling, and I trust our audience here on the podcast. So I'm really honored to be able to be vulnerable with you guys.
It's beautiful. It's amazing. Okay. What you bring to the space is beautiful. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, we're really grateful.
Yes,
Really.
totally.
It's
Okay,
so,
so
it's so yeah, it's also so cool to be bold enough to be like, just do this on me right now. So we could definitely talk about, like, I feel like we talk about this stuff conceptually so much, and that's also interesting, but it's a cool new, and I don't know if we've done an interview like this either. So
we have, yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah,
So
I know I haven't. This is new for me too, so this is great.
awesome. Okay, so in the interest of the exercise that we're going to do with you, I want to just run through some possible sensory detail categories you could find something in, right? So visual, um, the difference between saying it was a nice day and then describing, like, the sun was out, the clouds were floating by. I could feel, now I'm jumping into other ones. So there's the visual, there's the audio, what things sound like, the sound of someone pulling their nails down a chalkboard. It's like you feel it in your body when I say that, right? It's like that's that's the power of these sensory images. There's tactile, there's touch, sort of there's another piece of that too I'm going to get to in a minute. There's taste and smell as well. Like if I say uh lemon wedge in your mouth where you bite down, like your mouth might start watering, or the smell of freshly mown grass, you can almost smell it in your nose. Then there's embodied emotions, right? Those are really powerful because it's the difference between, it's like giving the emotion a description, a visceral a description. So there's a difference between saying, I was really afraid, and saying, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel the sweat beating on but my heart was going to pound out of my chest. I gave 3 of those things, but that, almost just saying that, tells the listener that they're scared, because then they're able to almost recognize that feeling in their own body. We are animals, and so we feel and see and touch. There's another detail that I think is crazy interesting to me, and that's digital details. That's numbers. So let me give you an example of the difference. If I were to say, a while ago, I had an epiphany. Okay. Or I could say, on October 30th, 2022, at 7 p.m., I had an epiphany. That changes it, right? Yeah. Because then you're like, well, what happened that day? What time of year was that? It was at nighttime. I wonder what it was. Then you can almost place yourself too, like, what was I doing on October 30th, 22? Was I even like, if I were to say in 1972, people would be like, I wasn't even yet, right? So there's that.
I was. Michelle wasn't.
I wasn't.
But there's also like, here's another example. Um, the other night, some of my friends came by my house for an impromptu party. Or 8 p.m., 2 of my friends came over for an impromptu party. That's one kind of party. Or at 3 o'clock in the morning, 50 of my friends show up at my doorstep for an impromptu party. So you start, the detective in our brains goes, what kind of person calls 2 people showing up at 8 o'clock an impromptu party? What kind of parties are they used to? This must be like, they like cozy parties. Maybe they sit down and watch Netflix. 3 o'clock in the morning, 50 people showing up. That's a completely different scenario. And we discover or start to build in our mind the kind of person who might have 50 friends, first of all, who think it's okay to show up at their house at 3 o'clock in the morning for an impromptu party, right? The storyteller's giving information by showing rather than telling. Because they could have said, I'm a party person. I am super social. I like people to come over to my house any time of the day. Or they could say, at 3 o'clock in the morning, 50 of my friends came over for an impromptu party and I was down, right? It's totally different. And it puts the storyteller in the story. It also puts the listener inside the story too.
I think listeners like to feel on that point of the detective. We talk about this a lot in a lot of aspects. And you probably can think of this as if you imagine watching a TV show or reading a book, or listeners like to feel like they are being treated as though they are smart and not
Yes.
being handheld through things. I think this can come with things like, but it feels more satisfying to feel like you kind of are connecting the dots if someone's laying them out for you rather than someone like really hitting you over the head with a certain thing. We
Yeah.
talk about this so much with kind of like the meaning of the story. What's the story about? Like we do a lot of exercises talking and kind of working through with the storyteller, what's your story really about? What's the real deep core of it? But the key often is the storyteller might not even say, maybe they'll say 5% of what they say in that session where we're trying to uncover it. That's really an exercise for them to kind of know and to kind of say, honestly, as little of that as possible, such that it can still be conveyed. But ideally, it's conveyed through like a scene or through like a moment in the plot rather than like, and so by the end of that, I had really learned that it's important for me to stick up for myself, and I will do that from now on. Like that as an ending makes me feel as a listener like, okay, am I 5 years old? Like that's how you end the story for a 5-year-old, and that's fine. But like it would be so much nicer if it felt like, and then I looked at her, and I walked out the door. Maybe that means something based on what we've built up, and that can feel like such a more an ending that allows the listener the respect of like, you've been listening to this whole story and you can feel the impact of that rather than me telling you what the impact of that was.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Shall we
Okay.
do another exercise? I feel like we maybe have time we should choose wisely. What are you thinking
I'm
to do?
thinking that the time to combine a couple of exercises, right? So if you have a story top of mind right now that you just want to try and see, hey, I'm going to remember the main thing about a story is there's a change. There's a change embedded, right? So as long as you have a story, like it doesn't have to be long, where you're one way at the very beginning of the story and you're a different way at the end, choose that one. It doesn't have to be, obviously, you're pulling it out of your hat right now. So it doesn't need to be a finished product, right? So if you want to we can give you like, I don't know, 2 minutes to explore it. See if you can pull some sensory images in, like that are related
I'm
to.
ready to go. Let's do it.
Okay.
Boom.
Then let's explore that. Then we might jump to the next thing, which Michelle, I bet you.
Let's just do 2 minutes of, diving
Yep.
into the story, exploring those sensory details.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Whenever you're ready.
I've
we
never
begin.
told this story before, so I have no idea how it'll come out. But
Okay.
I'm heading to Kenya again in a couple weeks, and so I've got Kenyan stories on my mind. So I'll tell you a Kenyan story.
Perfect.
So 2 years ago, it was actually almost 2 years ago today. It was in October 2022. I flew down to Kenya. It was on the Indian Ocean, which is just the most glorious, breezes and sunrises over the ocean. And I was getting really emotional because my dad had died in Kenya, and this was my first time that I had gone back to the country, and I just didn't have any idea how overwhelmed I would be with emotions. And my body does weird things. I have Ehlers-Danlos. If I get at all dehydrated or if it's too hot, I start getting wilty. And so I was trying to teach this class. It was probably like midweek in the afternoon, and it was pretty warm, and we were going into a fairly emotional session. And this goes back to, how a person changed me. And so I was co-facilitating this coaching course with my friend Thomas Mundia, who lives in Kenya. And he just noticed me, and I was trying to hold it together and just be like, okay, I'm going to make it through the end of the day, keep on, teaching this course. But my body was getting a little wilty and was not feeling so good. And I was going to just push through. And he just, told the class, hang on, guys, you just take care of yourselves for a few minutes. We'll be right back. And I just remember the feeling when he reached out and he grabbed my hand and he said, come with me for a minute. And he walked me down the steps. We were kind of in this like grass hut at the top of a flight of stairs. So he walked me down to the swimming pool to a place where it was kind of not able to be seen by everyone else. And he just said, "You're doing great. I'm right here with you. Here's a glass of water. Let's sit and hug for a minute."
Mm.
And his eyes are so warm and brown and amazing. And he gave me a big hug and a smile. And then we walked back up the steps together. And I really was friendly with that
Mm.
support right there by my side.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. You did some lovely detail work. Appreciated.
I'm still thinking about the breeze.
I know.
I think that was like the very beginning, but like, yeah, that one stuck with me. And then
And
his
this,
eyes, the warm.
yeah, the eyes, the specificity of the time of year, the grass hut. I could start to feel myself arrive there with you. Also, the feeling, the description of your emotional state was nice as well. It gave
Mhm.
us this context for why you would be having a hard time, and you were really open with sharing that. So that was lovely. So nice job on the sensory details. So
Mhm.
the more
Thank
story,
you. We coaches, we're exquisitely aware of sensory detail, and we're
Yeah.
always
yeah,
listening for how do our clients express themselves, which of
Mhm.
the senses do they tend to use the most, how do they express how they experience themselves. So this is all like
Mhm.
really in line with what coaches do every day. So
that's
Amazing.
that's really interesting because that in some ways, Michelle, I wonder if you're thinking the same thing. Like when we start going into sensory details, the stories just start deepening because people become more present with
They're
their
actually
story.
putting themselves there. We often do an exercise when we start with sensory details where you'd come in with that story in mind and we'd all like, lay on the ground or like get in a comfortable position and do sort of a guided meditation basically through where it's like you are basically walking into that space
Mem-
and you imagine yourself, we spend some time in that memory and it's like, okay, play it out. Like think, like notice what's this like, what's that like see what you can notice from really like immersing yourself in that memory. And so like the process of doing that can be really emotional or really like illuminating and deepening in terms of your understanding of the story. I
Mhm.
think,
I'm kind of curious. Okay, I don't
yeah,
want to take us too much off target, but like
do it.
sometimes in coaches, if somebody comes in with a dream, we might invite them to say the dream in the present tense instead of like, so like my
Yeah,
story was like, it was 2 years ago and I was in Kenya, but sometimes asking the person like, I'm in Kenya, I'm walking down the stairs, like saying it in the present tense even makes it a bit more, like it's happening now.
That
completely. We love
that's
that.
it. Yeah. Michelle and I are like, Michelle, I'm looking at you because it's like we do that. That in some way, if we're having a little trouble getting inside the story a little bit, telling the story in present tense is a way to cut through everything because the storyteller then is in their story more and more. It takes people, I've just discovered this recently. Sometimes it takes people degrees of entry to get to be able to tell their story present tense, depending on how charged the story is, right? So sometimes you have to take little baby steps, and then finally, when they're there, it's for the purposes of a story being interesting. Boy, that does it right there. But for the purpose of someone understanding their story more deeply, that also removes all of the stuff that sometimes clouds the meat of the story,
Mhm.
and it goes along. Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Or I think along clouding things that can decloud. I thought of an exercise that I'd love to do with kind of that version of the story that you just shared. It's kind of in the same theme. And I know Michelle will be very excited about this because I think this is her favorite concept, which is the
Yes,
fillers
there's
concept. Um, so
yeah.
this is something we usually will introduce in the second half of the class, sort of, we've explored lots of stories. We're just getting comfortable with saying them and telling them and uncovering lots of details and sharing them. And this sort of gets a little more into the performance aspect, because ultimately there's a difference between, you get coffee with a friend and you're telling them something about your life, and standing on a stage and you have 5 minutes and everyone's looking at you and you're trying to kind of you're almost creating an art piece with your story. It's less conversational. It's a little bit more of a thing that's being performed. And so fillers basically refer to words that we put in our stories that are not necessary. And it's kind of, I guess, basically just a public speaking technique. But I think we kind of take it a little further. So there are things like, whatever, like, things like that, things that you say in conversation and that makes conversation feel normal. Because if I was talking to you and I was never using any of these words, I would sound sort of formal and strange probably. But what it does for the stories is it can declutter these things. My brother gave a speech at my wedding, and he, after talking to Michelle Darby about his speech, which I asked him to consult her, he was like, she told me about these fillers, and at first I thought it was kind of dumb. Like, I was like, like, you're making me say it in this specific way. But then he was like, wait, I really felt it. I felt the difference between saying, yeah, and I really love Megan and Michelle, versus saying, I love Megan and Michelle. Just kind of stripping it away, just not leading into it with an and or a so, and just kind of standing in it and letting it stand there. And that can feel sort of uncomfortable, with having gaps between your sentences, not stringing them all together. But it's like, it's very powerful. It's like when someone pauses in a speech and you're hanging on to the next word. So it both has this element for the audience where it's very clear and you're hanging on to their next word, but also for the speaker, like, it can feel so, like, even just doing that now, it feels more vulnerable to say, I was teaching this class, it was warm outside, I had this feeling of, as opposed to kind of never stopping and filling it in. It feels more vulnerable to have these pauses, but ideally saying these sentences that are very, like, pure and direct connect me to those things that I'm saying and slow me down to actually feel them. Anyway, the filler that I heard you saying, Christy, which is not a problem, but this is how we would coach, is a lot of ands. And I think and is sort of, it's not it's not like, it doesn't feel like, oh, you're nervous and you're finding out what to say, but it's sort of just like, we don't really need it as many times as you might say it. I wrote down, you sort of had, and you told the class to hang on. And I remember we walked down and we did this and we did that and we did that, which is very natural and normal and how you would talk conversationally. But I wonder how it would feel to, I guess, you could try telling it again. And it's kind of just the thing of slowing down, thinking about what you're going to say next. I felt myself almost saying and. It's always hard to talk when you're talking about fillers. Then I'm like, I'm saying them all the time. But anyway, let's try something around that. What do you think?
Are you good? Are you up for that, Christy?
Sure.
I want to add a little bit to the filler conversation. When a story is first out of the box, you're just going to have a lot of fillers. That's just part of the process. There's nothing. And by the way, fillers are not the enemy. They're not. Sometimes they give us really important information about where the hot spots of the story are. It turns out that when you get rid of the first generation of the fillers, so fillers can be words like and, but, so, just, like, I remember when can be a filler. I decided to can be a filler. I realized that can be a filler. The only times those are not fillers is when they're actually actions as opposed to filling. So when the first round of fillers are gone, those are usually the easy ones. They're sort of low-hanging fruit. then you might be left with some in certain parts of the story. And those are interesting because they serve a different purpose at that point. Often the first round are like, we think we need a word to bridge one thought to the next. We don't realize we can actually use punctuation like we do in writing. So the first round tends to go away when we figure out we can use a comma, we can use a colon, we can use a semicolon. There can be exclamation points, any number of those things. Then we're left with the other ones that, to me, they're like these beautiful gems. They tell us that something important is happening. The storyteller on some level is aware of it and hasn't gotten to a place where they either recognize it or believe it's okay for them to say it out loud without it being cloaked with the filler, right? Once that's removed, it feels different. I'm going to give you an example. Michelle, you wrote down one of the sentences that Christy said with a filler, right?
Yeah, I had a couple. There was a couple sequences. One was kind of from the beginning where you were describing the setup. So it was something along the lines of, and I was teaching this class and it was warm and I was feeling emotional.
Right.
We can use that as an example.
Yeah. So try that. So say it with the fillers first. Say it the way you said it. Put the ands in there. Let it be there, because this is an important part of learning how to deal with fillers, or how to have a different relationship with fillers. There's also an important piece in here I just need to mention is you're never doing anything wrong. It's everything's right. It's the fillers are giving you information about where you are in the process of your story, or the parts of the story that need a little more attention to feel like they can live and breathe, right? So I want to just preface, when you go through this, when we're doing this work, you're doing the right thing by exploring the fillers and letting them be there for a minute. They're not the enemy. They can help us understand the story better. So say that part that Michelle said, if you have gotten it.
You can extend the sentences if you want, or fill in more. Kind of the setup of, and I was teaching this class and it was warm and I was feeling emotional.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm there in Kenya and I'm teaching this class, and it's by the beach, and there's a set of stairs nearby, and I'm trying to hold things together.
Great. Now, take it a little slower and let there be commas there instead of and snow and snow. I want snow. Anyway, so, right? Let the so go at the beginning. Go one phrase at a time. Okay.
I'm on the Indian Ocean. My dear friend Thomas Mundia is there by my side. I'm getting overheated. He's paying attention. He takes my hand. He pulls me aside, and oops, I said a name.
Okay.
I realize what it's like to be able to lean on someone and not to hold it together.
Great. That last one had a couple of fillers, so we're gonna do that. Okay. I realized that. What did you realize? Tell me what you realized.
What it's like to lean on someone.
Okay.
I wonder if you said it
together.
I wonder if instead of saying, and I realized that this is what it's like to lean on someone, what if you just said, and I'm curious what Michelle would say, but I thought a stripped down version could be, this is what it feels like to lean on someone, especially since you're doing it in the present tense so beautifully. It's like, instead of telling us that you realized it, realize it in that moment. This is what it feels like.
Try saying it with that first, and then the way Michelle described.
From the beginning or just the last?
I realized that sentence.
Okay.
Say it with I realized. Use that.
We'll do it before and after.
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to say it like I did before? And then,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I realize this is what it's like to lean on someone and not have to hold it together.
And do it, and instead of like have and not hold it together, see if a comma will work there. We're going to see. We're just going to experiment.
Okay.
but then what Michelle said too, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
I feel in my core that it's okay to lean on someone. I don't have to hold it together.
I love that.
It's really solid. It solidifies the experience in the now and it makes it more permanent. Like it wasn't just a thing that happened once, but this is an experience of this is what it is for me.
Yes. And in some ways, interestingly, well, for the listener, right, Michelle, it's clearer, right?
The
Yeah.
whole thing, I also loved your the exposition too before we got to this final line. That really was powerful. I could feel like a presence, and it was really strong. So I
Yeah.
could I could I am yeah, I think that was a great example of kind of what it can do for just creating like I was like, what's she gonna say next?
I know.
Yeah.
The other thing in terms of like a person's experience of themselves and an experience of something they're relaying from the past is that experience then becomes something that is food. It then becomes we're owning it. We have ownership of our experience in that way. The fillers keep in some ways are asking to be removed. I like to think they're there and they're sort of saying, red light, this is some important information here. Pay attention. Don't rush over me. That's if you know how to like listen to your story. The other thing is about this, I kind of, Michelle, I don't know if I've told you this recently, but I kind of, and I may have done this with you. I kind of prefer this process as the filler gym because what you're really doing is you're practicing. You're not locking language down. You're trying to figure out where in your body things come from or return to, so that when you're telling a story, you can be in the moment, not because you've memorized a script, because you are with your story. You know what it feels like to be present. There are no fillers in the way of you being present
Right.
with your.
You're practicing transferring what's coming up to what you're saying, which you will do when you tell it again, hopefully in a slightly different way or alive to what's happening then. You're not practicing, okay, yeah, I'm going to always say it like this, but practicing, yeah, that translation process of sort of like, okay, I know this is what happened next, and this is how I'm going to say it. I like that
Yeah.
gym analogy. You're practicing that muscle of like doing that translation, which is hard, like can be hard and can take some time.
Time. Yeah.
The
And
other,
that's the.
oh yeah.
Go.
I just thought of one more thing that I think is I love what you said about it felt how it felt to do it that final line the way that kind of really grounds you in that like having that experience because I think we sometimes will prompt people when they're choosing a story or when they're trying to figure out what their story's about. We will ask sort of why do you want to tell this story now? What part of you now connects with that story? Because in some ways you're like establishing and relearning that lesson by like saying it and really standing in that power. And sometimes it's not obvious, like, oh, why did I want to tell the story? Oh, it just kind of came to me in this prompt. Or I don't know why, but I really need to like tell the story. And I think there's always something, I guess, that because it's me the whole time. And it's like, what in me now wants to connect with me at that point, and that can be a
Yeah.
really good pathway into the story because when I'm telling it, it's me now, and I'm the vessel. So I don't want to feel sort of like I'm performing a past self, and it's sort of this stale thing. I want to feel like I'm me now, and I'm a vessel for me before, but also there's like something alive that is and present that is connecting with that, and there's a reason I'm me now wants to
Mm-hmm.
engage with the story.
Michelle, you bring up a good point. There's another thing that we really are have firm opinions of is that it's better not to write your story out and memorize it for exactly what Michelle's talking about. Because even if you told this story a year ago, you've changed in a year. We all do. So how does language want to be expressed through you now? How does the story want to be alive this time? Even if you told it 10 minutes ago, it might want to live a different way. Your responsibility as the storyteller is to understand the story, to walk through it, to explore, to collect sensory images, to find where the hot spots are, to really be in relationship, in a true relationship with the story. Then the last part of it is, now you got to deliver it to a listener so that they understand your story. Because in the end, oddly, your story is not about you. When it's out of your mouth, the people who listen to it are going to do with it what they need to do. And that's right. That's right, because we don't know what someone is perceiving in their life, how things are going for them. It's going to hit the way it needs to hit. We have to trust that. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a whole school of coaching that is around how to tell your story in a way, like if you're with a client and you really understand what's crucial in their lives right now, you can tell a story that maps across the structure of the story with all different details, but it's a metaphor, it's a myth. And they use the myth to make sense of their own life.
That's really cool.
This is so much. I wish we had 4 more hours.
I know. I feel like we could clearly go on
I
forever.
told my client, like, well, I'm going to be 15 minutes late because we're going a little over, but I'm having so much fun here. And my sense in talking with you both is that the core of this storytelling is really to choose how you want to tell your transformation, how you want to anchor it in your body, and how to tell stories of grace and thriving and goodness and growth and transformation instead of staying stuck. And so even asking to tell a story several times or to remove the fillers, these are exercises that you're using, but the point is to bring life and goodness to the storyteller and the story listener, if I'm getting you guys.
yeah, it's so interesting because when I started doing this, all I really cared about is I just wanted to hear and see a good story. It turns out that to have a story be the kind of good story I want to hear and see it does that. It does all the things you're talking about. Those are the things that light up my ears, light up my eyes, light up my heart, light me up when I hear it, because I recognize this other human who's going through whatever it is they're going through. And I know what it is to go through something. I don't know what they're going through. I have a little bit more, and we're in this together. We may not be together, but we are human together. And that's really a powerful thing.
Yeah, we connect at common humanity level through the body, through the felt expression of emotion, and not necessarily the exact same circumstances, but the same way that our bodies are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I might have to borrow that from you, Christy.
We're going to do tons of co-borrowing of everything between storytelling and coaching. I'm just loving the overlaps and the insights.
It's beautiful.
What else would be really important to say or do together before we wrap up? I can tell I want to take your whole course for one thing, but for today.
Yeah, that would be so great.
Michelle, do you have something? I have an idea of a way we can kind of close off and feel like we've, arrived. Yeah, I think maybe we could just go around the little triangle that we have, which sometimes makes a circle if you draw it out, and just say one word that that being together has brought to you, us being together here today.
Great.
So let's just like 10 seconds and see where we are with that. I've got mine 2 words. I cheated. I'll start. Deep gratitude.
I think mine is truth.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Christy, this is just I thank you so much. And Michelle, oh my God, it's so good to hang out with you online.
Yeah. I know we haven't seen each other in a bit. But yeah,
One
the
of
stuff
the
is so,
Michelles already
yeah,
came to visit me in France, but we need the other
I
Michelle to do
know.
the same. So I'll send you my address. If you fly into the Basel airport, I'll just text me when you land and I'll be there in 4 minutes.
Oh
So,
my gosh, so amazing. Yeah, I've got to get back there. That was really fun.
well, Michelle, I love you and Megan.
Mm,
Congratulations on your wedding.
thank you.
Come back soon. I said with no fillers. Are you proud of me?
I noticed. That was beautiful. Yeah, you're gonna start noticing it everywhere, unfortunately. It's kind
Yeah,
of it can be a thing that anyway,
that's true.
it's good.
Well, come do some events at Awaken too if you want. We'd love to have storytelling for coaches. Wow, this would be
That'd
so
be
fun
really
to do
exciting
stuff
to
together.
collaborate on stuff like that. I think we've done a lot of different versions of the class, and it's always fun to kind of customize it for whatever group.
True.
We've done it for a lot of different types of groups and different sizes, but I think the
Mm.
material, like, it's just so amazing how the material just, it always really resonates and works so well. I feel so like it's such a nice class to teach because one year it's like, yeah, like all of this is already here and it's all this beautiful humanity and we're just like tapping into it with these little
Yeah.
exercises. But it ends up being such a wonderful thing so
Yeah.
consistently, and it's such a fun thing to do. So yeah, I'd be down.
Yeah.
Well, being seen and felt and known and heard, I mean, that's the glory of being alive. I'm so glad you were both able to come today, and I'm looking forward to more storytelling between the three of us and beyond.
Yeah,
That would be so
that'd be
fun.
really fun. Thanks for having us. I'm happy to have gotten.
Mm.
It's fun to get to kick this off with such a fun conversation with the three of us.
Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you both.